Before this episode begins, I'd like to give a quick warning and apology for any wind noises that you may hear throughout this episode. It was extremely windy that day and hard to edit them out. Anyway, on with the first episode. Hello and welcome to the first episode of Postcast. Now, you're probably wondering what Postcast is, and since I haven't told you yet, that is completely fair. Think of this as your local community notice board for the Pevensey and Pevensey Bay area, but for your ears. There will, of course, be some fun sprinkled in there as well, like the upcoming event episodes from the dog show. There'll also be an episode with the Pevensey Plungers where I take a plunge in the sea, and no, that does not mean that I'm going to come out and fix your broken pipes. And with that out of the way, let's get on with this week's episode. Earlier this week, I took to the streets of Pevensey Bay to join the councillors in the annual litter pick. We started off in Sea Road Car Park, which is just outside the visitor centre and just outside the Aqua Club. Now, as you will hear, this went off to quite a comical start. Roy, over here, is already struggling with the bags due to the wind. Trying to hook them round onto... What is that you're hooking them onto?
Yeah, it's the bag holder. But the problem is, they're filling up with air, and then it picks back and hits me on the finger.
Shortly after that, the other two councillors, Mark and Shirley, arrived, to which we could then finally start the litter picking.
Alright, so if you find any dog fouling,
Yep.
we need to know the number. Any drugs paraphernalia, leave and tell us where it is, and we get that later. And don't touch anything that looks nasty.
First bit of litter's been picked up already.
I've got a bit.
Unfortunately, it wasn't on our side, so... Oh, you got a bit?
Oh, you know, if it's the test of this, you're seeing how small a bit you can pick up.
So you're not actually picking up
Well,
anything?
I've got that cigarette in. Look, there's another one. Watch. There. I think, yeah, pop balls are always good for cigarettes. Got it. There we go. Right. Come on, look, run it. Specialise in picking up cigarette ends.
Yeah.
Somewhere. It takes something like 35 years for these cigarette films to biodegrade completely.
Oh, God.
The fibres in them, they don't break down, apparently.
Oh. After spending a bit of time with Roy, I decided to cross the road to see where Sheila was at. She told me how you can get a hold of your own litter pickers and high-vis jackets if you want to take on a task like this.
We run 4 litter picks a year. Council, and we also try and encourage people to do litter picking themselves if they're ever going out walking.
Yeah.
And we'll happily lend litter pickers to anybody.
So is it like a free rental like system for these litter pickers, or
yes,
is it?
largely, but we pick them in by small lot, and we've given a lot by Wilton Council. We keep them. The council office in the Upper Wood sector. If anyone ever says they would like to do a litter pick, we would lend them. We want to encourage everybody really to do litter picks as much as possible.
So who would someone have to get in contact with then?
Probably the parish clerk, who's Sarah Mosdale, on 01323 743 900, and she would happily lend stuff out. On a big litter pick day, when we get lots of people, we often get 4 or 5 bags of litter. But actually, over doing these over the years has definitely reduced. There's less litter about, it's definitely got better. The message gets across, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Shall we keep walking?
Yeah. My God, it's so windy. I mean, if we don't pick the litter up, it might just blow away.
Of course, that's what's happened. It's blown about the village anyway.
Yeah.
Some here. And we like to start off the season with it looking smart, because the summer season for this village is important.
We then proceeded to walk past the Ocean View Cafe, where I got told a little bit of local history that I never knew.
So this is the council map that we have done, and we have the council board there which gives all the information about local things. And this here marks the spot where the old St Wilfrid's Church was.
Do you know what? I've never noticed that. I have never actually noticed
I don't
that.
think many people have. Mind you, it was all, we've had it cleared much better than we were.
Pictures of the old church as well.
Yeah. So the new church down there was built in 1969, and then they pulled this old building down. So as Roy says, there are pictures about it. Plus you've got a lot.
But anyway, enough about local history, and on with the first naming and shaming of this podcast.
It's time to name and shame someone on the podcast.
Oh,
Yeah.
who are you naming? Oh, wait.
Well, whoever it is, they know who they are. They've dumped their Christmas tree outside the Bay Hotel in the doorway.
Oh.
Yeah. Actually, it's a bit of a mess around the back of that. But I don't really want to go on to there.
You can't do that until it gets to the point where it's really bad. Growing vegetation with the risk of rats or something. You can do nothing.
After that extremely late, or extremely early, depending on how you want to look at it, bout of festive cheer, I decided to nip across the road to see where Mark was at. You seem to pick up an awful lot of rubbish.
Yeah, I look hard. Interesting what you can find, isn't it?
I mean, there seems to be a lot of cigarette butts around.
I think that's a losing battle, the cigarette butts. We've got 2 cans of beer, so and we're getting free coffee and tea in the local cafe. For our troubles, he came out and said, "Come and have a cup of tea after."
Oh, wow.
So they're supporting us.
Yeah. That's lovely, that.
Yeah.
That is lovely.
They do quite a lot in there, yeah. The cafe in the 1066, they call it 1066 place. They're quite supportive of it.
Now, I don't know how well you're getting on with those grabbers. I'm finding them to be quite awkward.
They are. Health and safety, isn't it?
Yeah. Obviously, it's better to use a grabber than to pick them up with your bare hands.
How's Shirley getting on?
Yeah, we seem to be finding an awful lot of cigarette butts. Yeah.
You need to go around with a brush. Right?
Yeah.
Get them up.
I found a old scrumpled up newspaper
Alright.
that someone seems just to have left and abandoned.
We found that
for whatever
scarf
reason.
that belongs to
Yeah. And the Christmas tree that was shamefully dumped in the door of the bay. Oh God, here's a full block. And I mean, I don't... This is the leaflet from... I'm assuming the restaurant they're outside. Which...
Let's see which one.
Mass...
Oh, it's Matella Bay at the end.
Oh, all the way down there, at the other end of the street.
Yeah,
So
they read it and then just thrown it out.
I wonder what it was that they didn't like on the menu. The great thing about litter picks like these is that anyone can truly get involved, like our next little guest proved.
This is our youngest litter picker, who's very keen.
He seems very keen.
Do you want to William, let's talk to Dan a minute. Tell him what your name is.
Hello.
Tell him how old you are.
Do you enjoy this, Megan? Yeah? Aww.
Got a bit there. Well done.
Just goes to show that anyone of any age can come out and do litter picking.
Exactly, it does. I
It's
think that bit's stuck.
After saying a quick hi to William, I bumped back into Roy to where we remingled about the strange things that we had picked up. Your bag's gone pretty full.
Yeah, not bad. I've got a good selection there. Bit of a car exhaust, a few vapes.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask vapes.
Yeah, there was a couple of vapes I found. Yeah.
Whereabouts were those?
They were around the back of the Bay Hotel. They've been thrown
got
into the
you.
hedgerow there. But
A mask there.
no gold though. Sadly. How's everybody else doing there?
Yeah, great. I mean, we ended up finding a load in that corner down there of just
litter.
everywhere, like coffee cups.
I saw it. I didn't see
There
much.
was even a
I didn't see much drugs.
Me and Roy then met back up with Shirley outside St Wilfrid's Hall.
What's you got, Shirley? Anything good? I didn't get any dog found at all. A bit disappointed about that, actually. I got a bit of car exhaust. A couple of vapes. I think they're, what do they call them? Elf bars, the little tiny
Elf
ones.
bars, yeah.
They're the ones they get. Yeah, I think
When you
that's
say
the
you got a bit of a car exhaust,
Yeah, well, it's the tailpipe section there. See my bag there? I'm just wondering if it's...
oh my god! I can actually confirm that Roy is not lying. He has actually got a bit of car exhaust. This episode of Postcast was brought to you by Pete Neville Roofing. Find him on Facebook. This episode was also brought to you by the kind support of the Parish Council, who have been very so kind in offering me the support and help that I need to get this episode underway. Yeah, cool. So I'm here in the Environment Agency's offices in Pevensey Bay, just off Coast Road, joined by Andrew Walker. How are you today, Andrew?
Yeah, I'm not so bad, Daniel. Thanks for inviting me on the podcast today.
Well, thank you for agreeing to be a part of this.
Our pleasure.
Would you mind just giving a little introduction to what you do and the Environment Agency? I'm aware that it's a massive organisation, but just the cliff notes would be useful.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So I've worked for the Environment Agency for nearly coming up for 20 years. I am a senior flood risk management advisor. And that means that I work on the Pevensey Bay to Eastbourne Coastal Management Scheme, which is currently England's largest coastal flood risk management scheme. The Environment Agency is kind of split into two sections. Flood risk management and coastal flood risk management is one side of that. The other side of the business is looks at regulation, the environment, waste, water quality, those sorts of things. And we've got about something like 9,000 people working for the organisation at the moment.
Jesus. When it said it was big, I meant it was big.
Yeah, there are a lot of us.
So, as you touched on earlier, there is a scheme that's going on at the moment to join the Eastbourne Sea Defences to Pevensey Bay Sea Defences. I'm right in saying that, right?
That's absolutely correct, yep.
And I believe that it's a joint effort between Pevensey Parish. No, is it Pevensey Parish Council that's joined, or is it you guys in the borough?
So, yeah, maybe if I can just give some of that kind of background to the landscape. The Environment Agency manage and operate as what's called the Risk Management Authority to the 9 kilometres of flood defence, the Shingle Beach.
9 kilometres.
9 kilometres between Coodon Beach at the eastern end and to Sovereign Harbour in the middle. So that's managed by the Environment Agency, currently through a contract with Pevensey Coastal Defence Limited, who are the contractors you'll see out on the beach.
I knew it was a Pevensey abbreviated
Something. There's lots of Pevensey initialisms, right? And then the other half of it is the Eastbourne section of frontage, which is managed by Eastbourne Borough Council. So you've got 2 different risk management authorities coming together into one project to manage a coastline more seamlessly in terms of coastal flood defence.
I mean, it's good that these two, well, actually it's great that these two organisations have decided to come together. I mean, we were just talking earlier about it, and some of those statistics that you showed were just so harrowing. Like, I was wondering if you could just maybe go through that again.
Yeah, sure, of course.
It's something that I think is so worthwhile for anyone listening.
Yeah, so when talking to people about this really significant project in terms of its geographic scale, but also the funding it can attract from central government, the reason why we're here and we're looking at a 100-year plan for managing coastal flood defences is because of the climate change forecast for sea level rise. So the forecast for the southeast of England at the present day is to see a 1.1 metre rise in sea levels by 2125. Now, and what that means in real actual terms for this coastline here, from the modelling and analysis work we've been doing, the flood risk modelling, the computer modelling of the coastline, is that in 100 years' time, the sea, if you take out the waves and the wind action, there's just the still sea level will be at the top of the current beach. And that's why this project is here, and we have to develop a plan for how we're going to deal with that in the long term.
What, it's the second time that I've heard it, but it's just still so harrowing to me. Like, I can imagine where I can't imagine, where I live and where my friends live to be totally underwater. Like, that is mental. The fact that without the waves, any of that, the sea level would be at the same level as the beach. Like,
yeah, and that's the current forecast. Like, the forecast could go up or down depending on how we globally respond to emissions and climate change. If we can get it under control, maybe that comes down. But if we don't, it could be more.
And I mean, is there time to get it under control, or?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Daniel. I think we've certainly got time to respond, but we need to adapt. We need to make changes quickly to make sure we put things in place to make sure communities like Pevensey Bay, Normans Bay, Beachlands are resilient to coastal flood risk.
Yeah, because it is places like this that would be largely affected by this. You know, we are on the coast of a country, and I mean, we were talking about earlier, when you watch things like this on the news, you think of deprived countries, and you never really think of the impact that it would have here. But you got to remember, we are an island. And we are on the coast, very on the coast, and we are lucky to have schemes like this put in place to help us, you know, because without them, it does seem pretty bleak.
Yeah, and you only have to go and stand on the beach at Pevensey or Normans Bay, and see that it's a raised shingle defence. Actually, the land behind it sits lower, so that's absolutely why we're here, developing this plan and trying to take people within the community with us along that journey as we plan and develop what we're going to do, both in the short, immediate term, what are we going to do next year and in 2030, but also what do we have to do to safely make our way to have resilient communities in 2125.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that brings us really nicely, actually. It segues us on. It's talking about just the overall plan, you know, like the general plan of it, because I know you mentioned earlier about it being 100-year, like an 100-year plan, but like in the immediate future, what's it looking like?
That's a good question. It's a little bit hard to say, and I hesitate because what we want to do here is bring a community, stakeholders as we would call them, in from the start of the project. We don't want to develop solutions or what we think are answers and then tell people at the end this is what we're doing.
Okay.
Hence my slight hesitation there in answering that question, because actually we don't know the definitive answer yet, because we're developing the plan. And I'm completely honest and open about that. What I would say is this will be split into phases over 100 years. You can't tackle a 100-year problem and go, there's one answer across 100 years. So there's absolutely going to be multiple phases of intervention. And those phases are going to be flexible. What we're going to do is we're going to attempt to choose those solutions in future points throughout the 100 years. Clearly, we'll map it out, what we think we're going to do. But because that sea level rise forecast might change, it might go up, it might go down, we want to make those decisions when we have that information. Another thing I'd add is that in the past 23 years of management in Pevensey Bay, where Pevensey Coastal Defence Limited have managed the beach, there have been no incidents at all of coastal flooding.
Oh, wow.
So whilst we absolutely do see erosion to the shingle beach, and that does happen, and sometimes it looks extreme. That is normal, and that's part of managing a shingle defence. That happens all across the south coast and the southeast coast of England. That is normal.
Yeah.
But that does say to me, in general terms, the flood defence that we have here is performing a good function. That there's certainly tweaks and adjustments we can make to it to make it better. And I know the plant movement on the beach, for example, is probably an issue for some people. So there are things we can absolutely do about that. But the general picture is that it's performing its function.
Well, that is all that you can really hope for when it comes to flood defence, is that it does do its function.
And it's called flood risk management because we are managing a risk. There's probabilities in there.
Yeah.
That big storm could come any winter, couldn't it?
Yeah,
So.
I mean, recently we've been having horrible weather. I mean, with like the winds and the rain that's just come out of seemingly nowhere. To get a little bit back on the topic that we were talking about earlier, we mentioned about one massive reason for doing this, which I think is the main reason, but I know that you mentioned about some other points that maybe you could elaborate on.
So traditionally, over the last, I guess, hundreds of years, we've thought about flood defences as being like heavily engineered structures. We've thought about them being sea walls, for example. There's now a drive, and a correct drive, from the Environment Agency and from government that we look to do things differently. So we look for more innovative solutions that can work in harmony with those traditional engineering approaches. And I would class a shingle beach as kind of somewhere in the middle. It's kind of between soft and hard engineering. But we've got targets on the project to significantly reduce carbon and significantly increase the biodiversity in the local area. And we're aiming to do that by using what we call nature-based solutions, where, by example, you do something in the near-shore marine environment, but you perhaps I'll give an example from somewhere else. In West Sussex, they're examining the use of kind of restoring kelp, so reintroducing kelp into the marine environment. Not only does that what we call sequester carbon, capture carbon from the environment.
Such an interesting word. I've never heard it before. But
it's new to me as well, so I'm now using it. But potentially there's a benefit there, not just for the ecosystem and biodiversity and carbon reduction. There's potentially the impact that a kelp forest could reduce the action of waves onto the shoreline. So I've said we've got an erosion problem here in places, or it's perceived that there's an erosion problem in places.
Yeah.
So are there things that we can do in working with nature and ecosystems which have those multiple different benefits to them?
And it's something that sounds so, well, on paper, little. Like, as you said, when you think of, like, sea defences, you think of these big engineering things. But, like, what's the word that I think? Jeez, I'm really... Sorry, I'm taking all of this in whilst I'm saying it. But... you saying about kelp, like it's you saying about kelp, it's something that's so little, but you're saying it's having such a massive impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we already probably know that kelp probably isn't the answer in this location, because traditionally, from what the data shows us, kelp probably wouldn't have occurred on the substrate out here. There are rocky outcrops where kelp might establish, but there's a lot of sand. So when the tide's out in Pevensey, you can see it's a lot of sand with some rocky kind of chalky outcrops. So here probably seagrass would be more natural, or there would have been a large native oyster population.
So is it about like the thing that's naturally growing in the area, not like the more natural things that you can get, the better the outcome?
I think that's got to be the objective. So, you don't want to work against nature. I think if we can work with it, then we can get good outcomes that benefit us as societies in multiple different areas, not just flood risk. So, for example, here there would have historically been a big native oyster population. That population now, for whatever reason, doesn't really exist, and we see Pacific oysters coming in, so we sometimes see them in places. But could we? And this is, I'm talking quite hypothetically. Could we reintroduce structures in the sea, close to the shore, that reintroduce a native oyster population, perhaps, and they form on an artificial or a biogenic reef? We're reintroducing this community back into its natural environment, but you have those added benefits. If it's part of a reef system, that can naturally reduce wave action on the coast.
And I mean, sorry, I'm gonna edit out a lot of the bits from myself because, as I said, I'm still taking it in.
Yeah, no worries.
So there's a lot of outreach about getting the community involved in this sort of thing. Like, we've had conversations about getting messages out there and, you know, that more transparency of it. I'm aware that there is a scheme or group that you co-run.
Yep, that's correct. So about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, I, with a lot of support from the local community, from the parish council and district councillors, started setting up a coastal community group. And I guess that's the reason why I'm here and I do this, is because I think we need to move past like statutory consultation, and what we actually need to do on major projects is get people towards participation, participate in the process. And you know, I said earlier about I can't tell you the answer because we're working through it. But I want the community, people who live here, to be involved in the process as we go along, and that's what I mean by participation.
100%. I mean, I've got the same sort of attitude when it comes to this podcast. And I mean, on the subject of doing things, if you have any more questions after, you know, we'll be talking more to Andrew about this, but if you have any more questions or even concerns, I don't know why you'd have concerns, but if you have concerns about this, which are totally valid, I will be thinking towards that. And so instead of getting in contact with me, get in contact with the group, because I feel like that is so important, and they have more knowledge than I would on this subject matter. So and now we've got the Pevensey Coastal Community Group, which has around 25 members, and the public are invited to come along. I co-chair it with a parish councillor, so the community voice is part of the chairing of the group. It's not just the Environment Agency and the project kind of talking. So we're trying to achieve that buy-in and that trust and that transparency, so we can have open, honest conversations, which I think will lead to better outcomes for everyone. So that group exists, and hopefully it continues to evolve and progress. And it's a model that we're looking to roll out to other parts of the project area. So we're thinking about, could Sovereign Harbour and Eastbourne perhaps have community groups that are similar to this, so we can drive participation. I mean, I do apologise for how frantic this conversation is, jumping from topic to topic to topic, but there is so much to talk about, and it is something that is so important, and something that, with your permission, I'd like to return to in the future.
Yeah, of course, absolutely, we'd be delighted.
Because it's so important. But you mentioned actually about the harbour, and I'm wondering, like, was there difficulties doing that particular section? Because I can imagine that might cross the threshold, right, between the Pevensey Coastal Group and you guys and Eastbourne Borough. Yeah,
so that's... I mean, Sovereign Harbour is in the centre of the project area. As I say, 15 kilometres, it's pretty much in the middle. I guess what I'm trying to reflect is where you've got different communities, the issues in Pevensey Bay, Norman's Bay, Stones Cross, Weston, Pevensey, are different to the topics that people will want to talk about in Sovereign Harbour.
Oh, of course.
So I just feel that we need to give those different communities, whilst they do overlap, give them their own space to talk about the things that matter to them.
100%, and that communication is so important with any project like this. Sorry, is there anything else that you want to talk about? I mean, I know I want to talk a bit about the access, but sorry, this is really unprofessional of me. I will be editing out this bit, but my brain has sort of gone.
It's certainly a very big project, and you're right. It does have multiple facets, and I think you're right. I think I think there's different things that we can talk about in the future, and keep doing this.
I'd love to come back to it further.
Yeah, we'd be delighted.
There is so much to talk about. I would like to think there is so much interest, because it is so local. It's there, you know. So.
I guess I'd probably add just a couple of things that maybe we haven't spoken about.
Yeah.
The Pevensey Bay to Eastbourne Coastal Management Scheme, which is, as we've said, funded by general taxation.
Yeah.
It's a very, very significant piece of financial investment in this local community. Probably the likes of which that have never been seen before. And as sad as it is for me to say it, there will be communities in England who will not receive this level of investment. So I think it's important that we, the project team, the community and our partners, kind of grab the bull by the horns, and make the most of this really significant opportunity. I mean, the project is currently in excess of £100 million. But as we develop, we have to go back to the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, through the development of the scheme, and we actually will be probably requesting additional funding in advance. So we're probably looking at a project here that's in the hundreds of millions of pounds rather than just £100 million.
Yeah.
Which is one other kind of general point that strikes me in talking to you, Daniel. You are a bit younger than me.
Yeah.
And one thing that struck us fairly on in the project is that the work we're doing here, and particularly the work that we're planning over the 100 years of the scheme, the people who benefit from that are the people who are currently at school or at college. And I think it's really important that we give a voice in this early stage when we're developing what the plan looks like over a number of years. It's really important that we give a voice to that demographic. So we have done some fairly significant schools engagement. There's the Coastal Schools Partnership. We've done a workshop with 10 different schools from there.
Wow, yeah.
So they're secondary primarily. And we're also doing work with primary schools locally as well. And there's about 10 primary schools locally where we're going to do the same sort of thing. We're going to take them to the beach and talk about different sorts of subjects around maybe why is there litter on the beach, or why do pebbles move along the beach when the waves come in.
Yeah.
Just to kind of...
I feel like that is... sorry to cut
No worries.
But like you said, I feel like that is so important because it is, the younger generation that is going to have that sort of impact, or what am I trying?
Well, they'll be the people who benefit from it.
That's what I meant to say. They'll be the one that will benefit from projects like this. Not saying that other people won't, but
I think.
Sorry, I'm just.
No,
I'm so I got it out of my own head for a second.
And it's a lot to take in, and I live this every day, so it's easy for me to talk about it. But yeah, we can absolutely see. Not just that the current younger generations will benefit from it, but also they'll be the people who are making decisions about this in the future. Like, we're not going to be here in 100 years' time. I'm not going to be here doing this. So we need to empower, ideally, people locally to get involved in the decision-making process throughout the entire journey.
And I feel like, obviously, I don't want to speak for my generation. I don't want to speak for people my age, but it is very noteworthy that we've grown up around reports of climate change, around reports of global warming, and we've seen the impact that it had, or that it's having, and a lot of people my age are quite outspoken about it anyway. My real, I wouldn't say concern, but my real question on that is, how would you get the people that don't necessarily think that it's as big of a deal? how would you get those people on side? Because I think those people, at the moment as it stands, those are the people that hold the real power.
Yeah, I can see why you say
That's why
that.
I said I wouldn't go too political.
Yeah, you've done it. You've done it, haven't
going
you?
Political.
Yeah. Hey, it happens to all of us. I'll try and be on my best behaviour. So, I'm going to use a piece of kind of industry jargon. There's a process called adaptation pathway process, and that, you know, when I said we can make decisions flexibly throughout the 100 years.
Yeah.
Adaptation pathway process is about mapping out what you think the plan is for the long term at the start, but then making decisions as you go. And that process exists, and this is the process that we use on this project. And it's to deal with managing uncertainty. So the uncertainty in this case is sea level rise. So whilst we have a forecast that it's going to be 1.1 metres higher in 100 years' time in the south of England, that could go up, that could go down, that could be exactly right. It depends how we globally respond with emissions and how climate change changes. What that allows us to do is it allows us to come back to the plan in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 75 years and reassess what is the forecast now. So if someone is sceptical about climate change and sea level rise, I would say to them, well, perhaps you're right. Let's hope you are right. The adaptation pathway process allows you room to factor in those decisions in the future. So if the sea level rise forecast reduces to 0 and we get to 2050, well, we go, great, you were right. We can all applaud those people, and our responses can be appropriate to that.
Yeah.
He says with a half smirk on his face.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Sorry, my mind has sort of gone blank here a little bit, because this is such a big issue.
Yeah, it is a significant issue. I think the point is we've got investment, we've got significant investment, and we've got a plan to deal with it. And I know some of those headline figures are alarming, and that's deliberate on my part, but there is a plan to deal with it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, is there anything more that you would like to add to this conversation? Or?
We could go down so many channels, and you could speak to so many of my colleagues about different things
and
for long periods of time.
In time we will. And I hope that I'll be able to, be able to have more conversations like this because it is important. But I think for just an introduction to this project, an overview of what it is, I think this has been perfect.
Grand. I'm glad you think so. Thank you very much for having us.
If you are happy with what is being included,
delighted.
Then we can just go from there.
Let's do that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thanks.
For agreeing to be on this.
Yeah, cheers, Daniel.
And giving me and this little podcast that I'm starting a go when hasn't even got a single viewer, or not viewer.
Listener?
TV brain, yeah. Listener. I was saying listener the whole entire time, and now I say viewer when it's being recorded.
You'll be on telly one day.
Anyway, thank you very much.
No worries at all. Thank you so much for having us. Let's do it again.
Yeah. The clock on the wall is telling me that it is time to end this episode. I would like to give a huge thanks to everyone involved, including everyone at the Parish Council and Andrew Walker at the Environment Agency. It has been a real delight to see that I have so much support and faith behind this first episode. I would, of course, like to thank you, my dear listener, for sticking with me. It's a brand new format. It's brilliant that you are here along with the ride. If you would like to get in contact with me, raising your questions, queries and concerns for the Parish Council, any other groups in the area or anything like that, the email that you will need to get in contact with is postcast04@gmail.com, or alternatively you can follow or like the Facebook page, which is Postcast, a Pevensey Bay podcast. I have been Dan Middleton, and you have been listening to Postcast. Whew. Bye.